Some men get played by strangers. Some men get played by business partners. By people they hired too quickly and trusted too completely. It happens. The world is full of people who are very good at appearing to be exactly what they aren't, and the only real defense against them is either extraordinary luck or the kind of slow, careful attention that most people don't have the patience for. What almost never happens, what you spend your entire life assuming will never happen to you, is watching someone try to play your own son at your own dining room table, while eating the pot roast your housekeeper spent 4 hours making. That happened to me on a Sunday in October. Her name was Vanessa, or at least, that's what she was calling herself. And the 2 words I said, quietly over a glass of 2019 Bordeaux, while she was still holding her smile in place, were not "get out." They were not, I know, they were not anything she could have prepared for. They were a name she recognized immediately, a name that told her in the space of 2 seconds that the retired, slightly out-of-touch father she'd been performing for over 4 months was not what she had assumed him to be. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I always do when this part of the story gets going. Welcome to Sweet Family Revenge. Grab something to drink, get comfortable, and remember, the people in these stories had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment below and subscribe if you haven't already. You're going to want to be here for all 3 parts of this one. My name is Daniel Whitmore, 61 years old. Charleston, South Carolina, the Wagner Terrace neighborhood specifically, on a block of Rutledge Avenue where the oak trees are older than most of the houses, and the neighbors still wave from their porches like it's a reasonable thing to do. Corrine and I bought this house in 1998, raised our son Connor here. Buried Corrine from this address 4 years ago when the ovarian cancer finally won the argument she'd been having with it for 14 months. I built Whitmore Risk Solutions from a 1-room office above a dry cleaner on King Street into a firm that consults for 9 insurance companies and 4 regional banks on fraud detection and financial crime prevention. 31 years. I retired from day-to-day operations 2 years ago, mostly. I know how con artists work the way a cardiologist knows how hearts fail. Not because I studied it from a safe distance, but because I've spent 3 decades watching the mechanism operate from the inside. I know the patterns, the timing, the particular way a practiced liar holds eye contact, just long enough to feel genuine, not long enough to feel like a test. I noticed something was off about Vanessa the second time I met her. Not something I could name immediately. Just a frequency, a slight wrongness in the signal. The way a smoke detector will sometimes click once in a quiet house for no reason you can identify, and you look up and think, I should check the battery. I checked the battery. What I found is the reason we're all here today. My son Connor is 33 years old, software engineer, a genuinely good man, the rare kind that has nothing to do with naivete and everything to do with being raised by a woman like Corinne, who believed that kindness was a decision you made before the world gave you a reason to make it. He started dating Vanessa Alcott, or the woman calling herself Vanessa Alcott, in June. 31 years old, she said. Graphic designer, she said. Originally from Savannah, she said. Warm, funny, attentive in the way that people are attentive when they've studied how to seem attentive rather than actually feeling it. My head of security at Whitmore Risk Solutions is a man named Marcus Webb, 64 years old. Former FBI Financial Crimes Unit, gravel voice, zero patience for anything that wastes his time, and the specific energy of a man who has seen every version of every scheme that human creativity and human greed have ever produced together. He's been running quiet background checks on significant people in my children's lives for 9 years. Not invasive, just thorough. The kind of thorough that costs enough that you only do it when the signal is worth the investment. Marcus called me on a Thursday morning in September. Not a text, a call. Daniel. His voice had that particular weight to it, the weight of a man who has found what he was looking for and isn't happy about it. The background check on the Alcott woman. Tell me. Her name isn't Vanessa Alcott. Legal name is Sandra Reeves. Born 1992, Phoenix, Arizona. 3 aliases on record. Vanessa Alcott is the most recent, established 14 months ago in Nevada. Active warrant out of Maricopa County for wire fraud. 2 prior incidents. Denver, then Portland, where she entered relationships with men from financially stable families, became engaged, requested large transfers, described as wedding or relocation expenses, and disappeared within 48 hours of receiving the money. The kitchen was very quiet. Connor, I said. Has no idea, Marcus said. I checked his accounts. She hasn't moved yet, but based on the prior timeline, Denver was 6 months in, Portland was 5. She's close, probably 10 days, maybe 2 weeks. I didn't know yet that close meant exactly 10 days. Send me everything, I said. Already sent. A pause. The specific Marcus Webb pause that means he's about to say something he's been deciding how to word. Daniel. The Denver incident. The man she targeted. He was 58 years old, lost his wife 2 years before she found him. I closed my eyes for a moment. She researched Connor, I said. She researches all of them, Marcus said. Thoroughly. I sat with that for a long time after I hung up. Then I made a plan. The Sunday lunch was her idea. That alone should have told Connor something. Though I understood why it didn't. When you're 33 and in love and you've been lonely since your mother died, and here is this warm, attentive woman who seems to genuinely find you remarkable, and she suggests a Sunday lunch with your father to discuss the future. That feels like momentum. It feels like the story moving in the right direction. It was momentum, all right, just not the direction she intended. She arrived at the house on Rutledge Avenue at 12:30 p.m. on Sunday, October 15th, wearing a cream dress and carrying a bottle of wine she'd clearly chosen to signal taste rather than because she particularly liked it. Connor was beside her with the expression of a man who is nervous about a situation he believes he can control. He could not control this situation, but that was all right. I could. Mr. Whitmore. She extended her hand. Warm smile. Direct eye contact held exactly long enough to feel genuine. I've heard so much about you. All of it accurate, I'm sure, I said, and shook her hand. Her grip was firm. Of course it was. She'd practiced that too. We sat down to lunch in the dining room. Ellen, my housekeeper of 16 years, a woman from North Charleston who makes pot roast the way Corinne taught her, and has opinions about everything that she shares freely and without apology, had set the table properly and made herself scarce, which was exactly what I'd asked her to do. Connor sat across from me. Vanessa, Sandra, sat to his right, which put her at the corner of the table and gave her sightlines to both of us simultaneously. She'd chosen her seat. I noticed that. The first 40 minutes were exactly what you'd expect from a woman who had done this before. She asked questions about my career with the fluency of someone who had researched the answers in advance. She described design projects with prepared confidence. She touched Connor's arm at intervals that were calibrated rather than spontaneous. Often enough to signal we're a unit, not so often that it tipped into performance. It was a very good performance. I've seen better. But not many. Connor was quieter than usual. He has Corinne's eyes and, when something is bothering him, Corinne's specific stillness. The stillness of someone processing something they haven't yet decided how to name. I'd been watching him all morning and thinking, he knows something is wrong. He just doesn't have the words for it yet. Halfway through the main course, Vanessa set down her fork, folded her hands on the table and said, I actually wanted to talk to you about something, Daniel. I hope that's okay. Of course, I said. Connor and I have been doing a lot of thinking about the future. A warm glance in his direction, intimate, shared. We want to do this right. A real wedding, something that honors, a carefully placed pause, the kind of family you've built, the kind of legacy Corinne left. Using Corinne's name, she'd researched that too. That means a lot, I said. We've been looking at venues. There's a property outside Savannah we both love. The catering, the guest list, the whole production, done the way it deserves to be done. She smiled. Not the warm smile. The other one. The one underneath. We're looking at approximately $2 million. The dining room was quiet except for the ceiling fan and, distantly, Ellen doing something in the kitchen. $2 million. Said at a Sunday lunch table, over pot roast, with the calm delivery of someone who has said this number before and has learned precisely how to make it sound like the most natural thing in the world. I picked up my wine glass, took one long, unhurried sip, and then, under the table, against my shin, my son's foot connected with mine. Hard. I glanced at him. His eyes moved to his left hand, which was resting below the table line. In his fingers, folded once, was a small piece of paper. He slid it toward me along the edge of his chair. I took it without changing my expression, reached into my pocket as though checking my phone, unfolded the paper under the table. 4 words, in Connor's handwriting, small and tight, the handwriting of a man concentrating very hard on keeping his face neutral. Dad, she's a con artist. Help. I didn't let a single thing reach my face, not relief, though I felt it. Not satisfaction, though I felt that too. Not the particular warmth of understanding that your son, raised by a remarkable woman, had trusted his instincts at exactly the right moment and reached for exactly the right person. All of that could wait. I refolded the note, put it back in my pocket, picked up my wine glass, looked at the woman across the table who was reading my silence as consideration, as a man calculating whether 2 million was a negotiable opening number. That is a significant figure, I said pleasantly. It is, she agreed. But some things are worth doing properly. Absolutely, I said. I set down the glass. Tell me, I said in exactly the same pleasant tone, how is Derek doing these days? The smile didn't break immediately. That's the thing about professionals. They don't shatter on the first hit. The training holds for a moment. The smile held for approximately 1 full second after I said that name, long enough that someone not watching carefully would have missed the change entirely. I was watching carefully. I have been watching carefully for 31 years. 1 second. Then something moved behind her eyes, a quick, involuntary recalculation, an emergency revision of every assumption she'd walked in with. And her hand, which had been resting open and relaxed on the tablecloth, moved 2 inches toward her purse. There it is. I'm sorry? The smile was back, slightly reassembled. I don't think Derek Holloway, I said. Your husband. I was just curious how he was getting along. The dining room was completely silent. Connor looked at me, then at her, then back at me. Son, I thought, I promise I'll explain everything. You've got about 18 minutes. Sandra Reeves set down her fork. I don't know anyone by that name, she said. Steady voice, steady eyes, professional to the last. That's interesting, I said, because he's been employed at Whitmore Risk Solutions for 4 years, and you appear in his personnel file, specifically in the photograph attached to his spousal benefits enrollment submitted in 2000-2001. The two of you at what appears to be a courthouse in Phoenix. I picked up my wine. You were wearing white in that photograph too. Different style, but white. The way light leaves a room when the sun goes behind a cloud. Connor said very quietly. Vanessa. Sandra, I said. Her name is Sandra Reeves. Active warrant out of Maricopa County, Arizona. Wire fraud. The silence that followed was the specific silence of a table at which every calculation has been revised simultaneously by every person sitting at it. Sandra Reeves looked at me. For the first time since she'd walked through my front door, the performance was entirely gone. Just a woman, looking at the one man in the room who had known exactly who she was since September. I didn't know yet what was going to happen in 18 minutes, but I had made a phone call that morning, and Marcus Webb had never once in his life been late. Nobody moves in a dining room that's gone completely still. Not right away. There's a moment, 3-4 seconds, where everyone at the table is waiting for the situation to resolve itself, the way you wait for a glass that's tipping to either catch itself or fall. Nobody breathes. Nobody reaches for their water. Everyone just waits. Then Connor said, Dad, what is happening right now? Not a question. A statement delivered with the specific tone of a man who needs information immediately and is being extremely controlled about how he's asking for it. What's happening, I said, is that I've known since September, and I've been waiting for her to make the ask. He stared at me. Since September, Marcus Webb ran a background check in late August, called me with the results on a Thursday morning. Sandra Reeves. Born Sandra Reeves. Multiple aliases. Active warrant. 2 prior incidents very similar to this. One in Denver and Portland. You knew, Connor said. For 6 weeks you knew, and you needed her to sit down at this table and say that number out loud. With a witness. Connor looked at Sandra. Sandra was looking at the tablecloth with the focused attention of a woman running very fast calculations in a very small space of time. I'm going to ask you something, Connor said to her. His voice was steady in the way that takes effort to maintain. And I want the truth, not a performance. The truth. He paused. Was any of it real? She looked up at him, for just a moment. One unguarded, genuine moment. I saw something cross her face that wasn't calculation. What it was exactly I couldn't say. Regret, maybe, or something adjacent to it. Something that had briefly been real somewhere inside the performance and was now being acknowledged on its way out. Then it was gone. I'm not going to answer that, she said quietly. That's an answer, Connor said. He picked up his fork, set it back down, picked up his water glass instead, and took a long drink, the way a man drinks when he needs to do something with his hands while he processes something his brain isn't entirely ready to process. I'd worried about this moment. The moment he found out. Corrine used to say Connor felt everything twice, once when it happened and once when he had time to sit with it. The first hit was landing right now. The second one would come later, in a quiet room, and that was the one I couldn't be there for. But right now, I needed him present. Connor, I said. He looked at me. There's a car outside, I said. It's been there since 12:15. He understood immediately. You called Marcus, before I made coffee, and the car is waiting for my signal. I looked at Sandra, which I haven't given yet because I wanted to give you the opportunity to make a decision, whether you walk out of this house cooperatively or whether the conversation gets more complicated. I said it without particular heat, the way you state a fact to someone who needs to understand it clearly. Marcus has everything. The aliases, the warrant, the personnel file photograph, the prior incidents. If you have anything you'd like to add, anything that helps the process along, now is the time. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, How long have you known about Derek? 8 months, I said. He submitted a spousal benefits change request last February. My HR director flagged it for review per standard protocol because the name on the application didn't match any existing employee record for the spouse. It came across my desk as a courtesy review. I paused. I filed it away. I didn't connect it to anything at the time. Then Marcus pulled your background check in August, and the name was there in the Maricopa County marriage record. She absorbed that. He doesn't know, she said. Not a question. Derek? No. He's a good employee, actually. Careful, reliable, shows up early. Whatever arrangement the two of you have, it's clearly one he's comfortable not examining too closely. I picked up my wine. That's between the two of you. My concern is my son. Sandra looked at Connor. Connor was looking out the window. I'm sorry, she said. To Connor, not to me. He didn't look at her. I know, he said. I don't think that changes anything. It doesn't, she said. I know. There was something almost decent about that exchange. Two people acknowledging something true without pretending it was more than it was. Then the moment passed, and we were back to the dining room on Rutledge Avenue with a $2 million ask sitting on the table and a warrant from Maricopa County waiting outside in a gray sedan. I'd like to tell you that I was entirely calm through all of this. Mostly I was. 31 years in fraud detection will do that. Will teach you to stay flat while things that should unsettle you play out. To keep the professional brain engaged when the personal brain wants to take over. I'd been calm through the September phone call with Marcus. Calm through 6 weeks of watching Connor bring her to dinners and day trips and the Halloween party at the Gibbs Museum, where she'd worn a costume and laughed at everything and been perfectly precisely what she needed to be. But when Connor had looked at her and asked was any of it real, and when I'd watched his hands on the table steady and controlled, the hands of a man absorbing a hit and choosing not to show it, something in my chest had done something that wasn't calm at all. It was the particular anger of a father watching someone use his son's loneliness as a financial instrument, and I had kept it exactly where it needed to stay, filed away, to be dealt with later. I pushed back my chair. Excuse me for just a moment, I said. I walked to the front window of the house, looked out at Rutledge Avenue. Marcus's gray Tahoe was parked across the street, engine off, exactly where I'd told him to be. I took out my phone, sent one text, front door. Then I went back to the dining room and sat down. The person I've just invited inside, I said, is Marcus Webb. You may remember that name from the Maricopa County filing. Sandra went very still. He's going to come in and we're going to have a brief conversation, I said. And then, this part is going to be finished. Dad. Connor turned to me. What exactly does finished mean? It means the warrant gets processed through the appropriate channels, I said. It means her victims in Denver and Portland get a call from Marcus that they've been waiting a long time to receive. And it means, I paused, that you get to finish your pot roast in peace. Connor looked at the pot roast, looked at Sandra, looked back at the pot roast. Ellen's going to be upset if it goes to waste, I said. Something happened on his face. Not quite a laugh. The shadow of one, the place where a laugh would have been under different circumstances. There's my boy. The front door opened. Marcus Webb came in the way Marcus Webb always comes into rooms, without announcing himself, without looking like he's arriving, just suddenly present in a way that fills the available space. 64 years old, built like a man who spent 20 years doing things the FBI doesn't write about in press releases, with a face that has long since stopped doing anything it doesn't mean. He came into the dining room, set a folder on the table, looked at Sandra Reeves. Ms. Reeves, he said, I'm Marcus Webb. You may have seen my name on some of the Maricopa County correspondence. Sandra didn't say anything. I'm going to explain what's going to happen now, Marcus said, with the patient tone of a man who has explained things to people in difficult situations so many times that he's developed a specific register for it. Calm, clear, without threat, because threat is unnecessary when the facts are sufficient. He sat down and he began to explain. If you've been with us for a while and you want stories like this to keep coming, hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. Honestly, 97% of people never do, and it's what keeps this channel going. So thank you, genuinely. And drop a comment. Tell me where you're watching from right now. City, state, country. Someone is watching this in a place I've never been, and I want to know where. Marcus talked for 11 minutes. He laid out the Maricopa County warrant, the 2 prior incidents, the personnel file photograph, the financial records connecting the Denver and Portland withdrawals to accounts traced back to Sandra's real name, and the cooperation agreement he'd spent the previous 3 weeks negotiating with a detective in Phoenix who had been working the file for 2 years without the physical evidence to close it. Sandra listened without interrupting, without expression, with the stillness of a professional who has arrived at a point of no return and is processing it accordingly. When Marcus finished, she asked one question. The Denver man, she said, is he okay? Marcus looked at her for a moment. He's fine. Rebuilt his accounts. Moved to Colorado Springs. Has a dog. A pause. He'd like his $340,000 back. I know, she said quietly. The Portland situation is more complicated, Marcus said. But that's between you and the DA's office, not for this table. She nodded. Connor had eaten half his pot roast during Marcus's 11 minutes. I noticed that, not with pride exactly, more with the specific relief of a father watching his son choose to eat lunch instead of completely falling apart, which at 33 years old, when the person you thought you were going to marry turns out to have an active warrant from Arizona, is honestly a reasonable choice. Corrine would have been proud of him. She would have been furious with me for not telling him sooner, but proud of him. Marcus drove Sandra Reeves to the Charleston County Law Enforcement Center on Milligan Road at 2:45 p.m. that Sunday afternoon. She went without drama, without scenes, with the resigned professionalism of someone who had known this destination was always at the end of one of these roads and had simply been running a calculation about how long the road was going to be. It had been 4 months and 13 days, not her longest, not her shortest. I watched Marcus's Tahoe pull away from the curb on Rutledge Avenue. Then I went back inside and cleared the table. Connor was still sitting in the dining room when I came back through with the second stack of plates. He had his elbows on the table and his hands over his face in the posture of a man who is doing his accounting. I sat down across from him. We sat there for a moment without talking. The ceiling fan turned. Outside, somewhere on the block, somebody was mowing a lawn which seemed almost offensively normal given the last 3 hours. I have questions, Connor said into his hands. I know, I said. A lot of them. I know. He lowered his hands, looked at me. He had Corinne's eyes red at the corners now in a way that he was visibly refusing to acknowledge. You should have told me. Yes, I said. And no, that's not an answer. If I'd told you in September, what would you have done? He opened his mouth, closed it. You would have confronted her, I said. Which is the right instinct, and the wrong move. She would have disappeared. No resolution for Denver, no resolution for Portland, The warrant stays open. She resurfaces somewhere else in 8 months with a different name and does it to someone else's son. And she'd researched you, I said, more quietly. She'd chosen you specifically, knowing about your mother. Using it. I paused. I needed the ask on the record. I needed it at this table. In this room. With a witness. I needed it done. So I was bait, he said. No, I said. You were never in any financial danger. I had your accounts flagged with Marcus from the day I got the call. She couldn't have touched a dollar. I looked at him. You were. The reason. The reason it had to be done cleanly and permanently. He was quiet for a long time. She asked me once, he said finally, what Mom was like. The kitchen was very still. What did you tell her? Everything, he said. I told her everything. A pause, she cried. I didn't know in that moment whether that had been real or performance. I think Connor didn't know either. I think that was going to be the thing that took the longest to land. Come on, I said. I stood up. Ellen made pie. We're not wasting the pie. He looked at me for a moment, then slowly he pushed back from the table and stood up. There's pie, he said. There's always pie, I said. That's the whole point of having Ellen. We went to the kitchen. Some stories end at the arrest. The handcuffs click, the car drives away, the dining room gets cleared, and the story files itself under finished in the back of the mind. Justice served. Chapter closed. Move along. This story didn't end at the arrest. It started there, Wednesday morning, 3 days after the Sunday lunch. I was making coffee at 6:45 a.m. when Connor came downstairs, in the specific way of a man who has not been sleeping well and has run out of patience with himself about it. He was in the same sweatshirt he'd been wearing for 2 days. Connor, who irons his jeans, who was wearing the same sweatshirt for 2 days, and he sat down at the kitchen table and looked at me with his mother's eyes and said, I want to know everything, from the beginning, all of it. I poured him a coffee, set it in front of him, sat down, and told him. Not just September's phone call. Everything before it. The flag Marcus had raised in February about Derek Holloway's spousal benefits change, the moment in August when the names had connected the 2 weeks of financial surveillance on Connor's accounts, the research Marcus had done on the Denver and Portland incidents, the profile of Sandra Reeves that was built from court filings and banking records, and 2 interviews with a Phoenix detective named Gail Hartley, who had been working the case for 2 years without enough to close it. Connor listened without interrupting. He was very still in the way he gets when something is important. Corinne's stillness, hands around his mug, eyes on the table, processing. When I finished, he asked one question. The man in Denver. What was his name? Robert Callahan, I said. 58 years old. Lost his wife in 2019. Sandra found him 8 months later. He transferred $340,000 over 6 weeks. She was gone on the 43rd day. Connor looked at his coffee. She asked me once what Mom was like, he said. He'd said this on Sunday, too, sitting at the table after Marcus had driven away. He was saying it again because he was still working out what it meant. I talked about her for an hour. Sandra sat there and listened and asked questions, and he stopped. Robert Callahan probably did the same thing. Probably, I said. That's the thing she uses, he said quietly. It wasn't a question. It was a man arriving at a conclusion he'd been working toward for 3 days. The grief, the talking about someone you've lost. She learns everything and then she becomes the person who listens, the person who wants to know. And you think it's because she cares. Yes, I said, because it's the thing you most want, he said. Someone to ask, someone who wants to know. I didn't say anything. I let that sit where it needed to sit. He was going to be okay, not immediately, but he was going to be okay. He was his mother's son. Detective Gail Hartley from the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office called me on Thursday morning. She sounded like a woman who had been doing this job long enough to have developed a specific phone voice. Efficient, precise, not unkind. Mr. Whitmore, I understand your firm's investigator made contact with Sandra Reeves on Sunday. He did. She's currently with Charleston County. Should take about 3 weeks given the volume on the Phoenix docket. A pause. I wanted to thank you personally. The physical evidence your investigator compiled, the personnel file photograph, the accounts documentation, that's what we've been missing for 2 years. Happy to assist, I said. Mr. Callahan in Denver is going to be very relieved, she said. He's been calling this office every 6 weeks for 18 months. I thought about Robert Callahan, 58 years old, lost his wife, called the detective's office every 6 weeks for 18 months. Some men wait for justice and wait and wait. Please give him my regards, I said. And tell him the money is coming. Marcus is working the asset recovery. Another pause. Mr. Whitmore, can I ask, how did you connect the personnel file photograph to the background check? That's a fairly unusual link. I run a fraud detection firm, I said. Everything goes through cross-reference. It's just habit. Habit, she said with a tone suggesting she found this understated. Well, whatever you want to call it, it closed a 2-year case. So, thank you, made a second cup of coffee, stood at the kitchen window looking at the oak trees on Rutledge Avenue. October had turned into November while I wasn't paying attention. Some habits are worth keeping. 2 weeks after the Sunday lunch, Marcus called. Asset recovery update, he said. Sandra had 3 accounts we've been able to trace. 2 are frozen pending the Maricopa proceedings. The third, a smaller account in Nevada, was accessible and has been liquidated per the civil judgment. Amount? Split per the recovery agreement. Denver gets the lion's share. Portland secondary legal fees off the top. A pause. Your son gets nothing from this. She hadn't touched his accounts. I know, I said. That was never the point. I know it wasn't, Marcus said, just confirming. How's Derek Holloway? A pause with something almost human in it. Filed for divorce last week. Apparently, this wasn't the first time he'd been, let's say, informed about his wife's activities. He just hadn't had a specific warrant and a detailed report to look at before. Is he going to be all right? He'll be fine, Marcus said. Good employee. You said so yourself. Keep an eye on his file, I said. Make sure the next performance review reflects what it should. Already noted, Marcus said. Good man, Marcus. On a Saturday morning in late November, Connor drove over from his apartment on the east side of town. I heard his car in the driveway at 9:15, and I'd already put coffee on because he always comes at 9:15 on Saturdays now, which is new, which is one of the things that came out of the Sunday lunch that I hadn't anticipated, and I'm not going to say anything about because if I say anything about it, he'll stop doing it. He came in and sat at the table and we drank coffee, and he told me about a project he was working on, something with a new database architecture I understood roughly 30% of, and nodded along to with the confidence of a man who understands 100%. And at some point, Ellen arrived and made breakfast, and sat down and joined the conversation without being invited, which is also her habit, and which Connor has learned to accept as part of the package. At some point in the middle of eggs and toast, Connor said, I've been thinking about Robert Callahan. I looked up. The Denver man, he said. I looked him up. Connor, not like that. He has a foundation, small thing, local, Denver-based, for widows and widowers, support groups, financial literacy workshops, that kind of thing. He started it a year after Sandra cleaned him out. He turned his coffee cup in his hands. He took the worst thing that happened to him and built something out of it. I looked at my son. I was thinking, Connor said, about making a donation. In Mom's name. The kitchen was quiet except for Ellen, who was doing something at the counter with her back to us and pretending very hard not to be listening. I think, I said, that's a very good idea. I was also thinking, he hesitated. I've been talking to someone, a therapist, just to process things. Also a very good idea, I said. He nodded, looked at his eggs. She asked me, the therapist, what I learned from all of it. From Sunday and everything after. What did you tell her? He was quiet for a moment. I told her I learned that grief can be a door that lets the wrong people in, he said, if you leave it open too long, without knowing why. And, he said, that the right people, the ones who actually knew her, who actually loved her, those people have been here the whole time. He paused. I just wasn't always letting them in. There it is, I thought. There's the thing his mother would have wanted most for him to find. I didn't say that. Some things are better left in the space between people than dragged out into sentences. I just nodded once, and we ate breakfast. On a Tuesday in December, I came downstairs to make coffee and stood at the kitchen window watching the December cold settle over the oak trees on Rutledge Avenue. The trees were bare now. The neighborhood was quiet. On the counter was a small card, cream-colored, plain. Connor had left it on Saturday. I picked it up, his handwriting on the inside. For the Callahan Foundation, in memory of Corinne Whitmore, who asked questions because she actually wanted to know the answers. Below it, the amount of the donation. I stood there for a moment with that card in my hand. Corinne would have found this whole story infuriating, I thought. She hated cons. She hated the particular cruelty of someone studying a person's grief and turning it into a tool. She would have been sitting in that dining room on a Sunday in October, and she would have clocked Sandra Reeves in the first 5 minutes, and she would not have waited 6 weeks. She would have said something terrible and accurate and very, very funny, and Sandra would have been out the door before the pot roast was cold. And Connor and I would have spent the whole meal telling her she should have been more diplomatic, and she would have been completely right, and we all would have known it. I set the card back on the counter, made my coffee, stood at the window and looked at the bare oak trees. Got her, Corinne, I said, to the kitchen, to the house, to the particular quality of December morning light that has always felt more like her than any other time of year. Your boy's all right. He's going to be all right. The coffee finished brewing. I poured a cup, and for the first time in 4 months the house on Rutledge Avenue felt exactly the way it was supposed to feel, like somewhere the right people lived. Like home.